Welcome back to Session 5 of the Canadian International Camera Sports Literature Festival. I'm your host, Teddy Katz. I was a sports journalist with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation here in Canada for almost 20 years. I'm really excited about our next session, which features a new book that's just been released. The Thin White Line, the Inside Story of Cricket's Greatest Scandal. The author is Nick Greenslade, the Deputy Sports Editor of the London Times. It's the story of the spot fixing scandal of 2010, which sent shockwaves through the sport. It stunned the wider sports world as well. It was the start of a stunning chain of events that saw Pakistan captain Salman Butt and bowlers Mohammad Asif and Mohammad Amir banned and sent to prison. Moderating this session is Arup Ghosh, one of India's best-known TV anchors, with vast experience across news reporting and anchoring cricket shows. Arup, welcome.
Hi, Teddy.
Arup, keeping in mind the global audience that's joined us today, what did you think when you heard about this book coming out?
I was pretty excited reading about this book because this is a book which has come at the right time, I feel, and it talks about a very important episode in cricketing history. I'm a huge fan of the game, and also have been involved with the cricket shows and coverage. Worked on a long series with Tony Gregg on a series called Back Chat with a lot of Indian stars. But moving away from that, I think this comes at a right time when the IPL is about to be hosted from September 19th at the UAE, and there'll be a lot of interest in it. Also, I've noticed that of late there has been a lot of emphasis by the anti-corruption unit all over the world where cricket is played to stop this malaise of fixing. Will it go away? Can it be stopped at all? Is a huge question which Nick obviously faced while writing the book, and I think it is here to stay. How it will be tackled is another issue.
Just before we get to your conversation with Nick, what's the most fascinating thing about this book for you?
What I found the most fascinating part is that we knew what happened then, but the most interesting part for me was the way Nick pieced certain reasons why it happened. What were the socioeconomic factors? What were the other issues which triggered the need for such a deal? And why was it so easy for the fixers to not only trap the Pakistani captain, but two of the best bowlers probably this game has ever seen, and what a loss it has been. So for me, that was extremely interesting, and it triggers a lot of food for thought. So I'm now joined by Nick, directly from London. Nick, welcome to the show. It's been very interesting reading your book. I'll come straight to the point. Like I was saying, that you highlighted some important issues, particularly the economic disparity between, say, an India and a Pakistan. How much a Dhoni earns in a single season in IPL? How much does a Ravindra Jadeja earn that he came in as a young rookie, and now he has a farmhouse and a ranch and a pub and a restaurant and God only knows what, goes out in a sports car. But when you contrast to what the Pakistanis still get, there's a huge chasm, and that is something that triggers a lot of interest as to why they are so susceptible for fixing and for all the other issues that came up. When you started researching and when you started piecing the book together, what were your thoughts and how did it all begin?
Yeah, well, I didn't actually appreciate that the financial differential between Pakistan and the other major test nations, such as India, as you said, and also England, was so extreme. I knew they weren't earning as much, but I think there was a figure cited at the time in 2010 that the Pakistan players in England at the time would have been earning approximately £22,000 sterling per year to play for Pakistan, whereas their England counterparts were getting upwards of £400,000 a year. Now that's just for playing, and then you add on top of that the various sponsorship deals, which England players were found much easier to negotiate because there was a big developed sponsorship market in the UK. Now, obviously, when you bring those factors together, it's a lot more easily to be tempted if you think you're being slighted anyway in terms of the financial rewards that were on offer to cricket. So I think a lot of people in England needed to be more mindful of that. You know, we like to think of ourselves as being whiter than white. No England Test players, I think, as far as I'm aware, have never ever been accused of match fixing, and long may that continue. But they're in a very privileged situation, as indeed, as you said earlier, the Indian players are. They are megastars, and they are paid huge amounts of money. You know, close to £1 million now for regards to the top England players. So the idea that they would be tempted in the same way that you might be if you were a young Pakistan player. I'm not trying to excuse anyone here, but it's clearly a factor. You then also have to throw into the argument another element about Pakistan cricket, and I'm not sure its governance was quite as good, quite as developed as it could have been in terms of the way the PCB monitored the players and who they mix with. So again, there was a lot more exposure to malevolent factors there, and then you throw in to the mix as well the terrorist attack which occurred in Lahore in 2009 when the Sri Lankan team bus was attacked, and then they were forced to leave their country and were living out of suitcases. In fact, I think the attack was in 2008, if I'm much mistaken, and they were living out of suitcases for a long time. And again, their home from home became Dubai, UAE, which you referred to will be the home of the IPL soon. And there was a lot more temptation in the UAE. A lot of these people who have got bad designs on international cricket just happen to be based in the UAE.
Nick, where the Pakistani players were concerned, there were three of them. Salman Butt, the captain, a young captain. Then you had Mohammad Amir at age 18, a terrific talent. And then there was Mohammad Asif, who was not all that young. But after their ban and the prison sentence that they had, they were all out for at least a minimum of 5 years, at least Amir was. He was never the same bowler. You referred to Michael Holding, and I followed Mohammad Amir's career very closely after that, and it was such, the word that has been repeatedly used in your book is sad. It is extremely sad that such a precocious talent, such an audacious bowler, such a brilliant bowler is lost forever. Yes, he did come back, but he was never the same bowler. Mohammad Asif's career almost got over. Salman Butt is still struggling to get back. So when we talk about Mohammad Amir, you have quoted interviews from Michael Atherton and a couple of the other top-notch cricket writers and players. And while some of them, like Cook, may have alluded to the fact that he should have been banned and for life, and why did they go easy? But when we talk about Amir, what is the sense of the tragedy you had, his tragedy, while you were piecing the story together?
Yes, I mean, sad really is the word. I mean, you have to go back and remember, you know, as we said, this was an incredible talent. I think he was certainly the youngest player to 50 Test wickets. It did it in next to no time. In that tour of England, he had a fine Test match at the Oval, the Test match before Lords, which is where the no balls were bowled. And then he was bowling a brilliant spell at Lords. Even when he was bowling no balls to order, he was still producing some brilliant cricket to remove England's top order. That was an amazing spell of bowling he bowled on the second day at Lords of the fateful Test match. Now, the problem is that he'd been caught up in something way beyond his understanding. You know, most dressing rooms in international cricket and in international sport are quite hierarchical. You have the captain, the senior players, and then you have the younger players, and generally the younger players take their lead from the senior players and the captain. Now, that is even more accentuated within the politics of the Pakistan dressing room, which is particularly hierarchical. You throw in the fact that also Amir, you know, came from a very a rural backwater, wasn't particularly well educated, you know, and suddenly at 17, he's thrown onto the international circuit and he's making it up as he goes along almost. He hasn't had a proper cricketing education almost in terms of how he handles the pressures that can come when you play international cricket. Now, he then falls in with a bad agent, Mazhar Majid, who has designs on cricket which are not healthy, and he falls under the spell of Salman Butt. Now, initially, Butt was a positive influence. Butt was a player who helped him out at the academy, before he was picked for Pakistan, he was a player whom he respected. And then in the summer of 2010, Butt is made captain of Pakistan for the Test team. Things should be good then for Amir. Unfortunately, as we now know, Butt himself has bad designs on international cricket as well. And he's caught between Mazhar Majid, his agent, and his captain, Salman Butt, both influencing him. They effectively groom him to get involved in the whole fixing saga, and they also blackmail him. He doesn't understand what he's been thrown into, and he goes along with it. Now, he obviously knew straight away he'd done wrong. He did have a chance to come clean. We should say that a lot of parties in the immediate aftermath of the no balls being bowled had said to him, look, we appreciate you're not the kingpin here. You're a young guy. If you confess, you'll get a more lenient sentence from the ICC. We can help you here. He did spurn those chances. Now, you can hypothesize why he might have done those things, because once criminal charges were brought, that suddenly brings a prison sentence into reality. He only decided probably about a few months before his criminal trial that it was time to confess. He had very good lawyers in England who worked with him and kind of explained to him why this was a good thing, both professionally and ethically. And he had people in the cricket world, as you said, Michael Atherton, former England captain, Mike Brearley, another former England captain. They could appreciate his plight, as could Michael Holding. And both Brearley and Atherton worked with his defence team in any way they could. And Michael Holding also provided a character reference at the trial. Unfortunately, 5 years away from the game is a long time for any player, however good you are. Now, he didn't bowl badly since he came back. He made his test return again at Lords in the summer of 2016. And as I say, didn't do at all badly. Played in the World Cup last year and actually featured in a T20 here in England earlier this month, even though originally he had decided not to tour because his wife was expecting a second child. So there was redemption of sorts for Amir, but probably not in the way we all would have hoped from him.
Nick, let me ask you a direct question, because you were in the thick of it while writing this book, and you've obviously researched a lot about it and pieced many other facets to it. And I thought a very interesting ride was reading about the way the reporter and the fixer went about their jobs. But talking specifically of Amir and the way the British courts treated him, what was your personal take as a sports journalist, as a senior sports editor? You've been in it for a long time. Did you think that they cut him more slack than what was required? Did they go easy on him? And what was your quick sense of the overall case, even where the other two were involved?
Well, do you know what? It's funny whenever I think about this whole case and fixing in general. I sort of go through different emotions, both in the case of Amir and others. I mean, for those of us who love cricket and love sport, fixing seems a great betrayal. It seems the ultimate betrayal, that you could do that. You could cheat your own teammates. You could cheat fans, people who adore you. Why on earth would you do that? Sometimes when you explain it to people outside sport and you say, well, he bowled a no ball, and they sort of shrug their shoulders and say, all right, okay, he's not a child killer at the end of the day. People in sport can take this extremely seriously and cast all sorts of evil aspersions over those who perpetrated these acts. Sometimes you need a slight sense of perspective. I think Amir was treated more leniently. He didn't serve as long in prison. He went to a youth offenders institute. The Pakistan Cricket Board and also the International Cricket Council did everything they could to get him back playing international cricket, even before his original 5-year ban was due to end. So a lot of help was geared to getting him back into the game, because I think they realized it would ultimately be a good message for cricket if they could say, look, we've taken this guy, we've punished him, but now he's rehabilitated. He's got a second chance. And second chances are important in the administration of justice, whether it's sport or criminal. You need to be able to give people something, that they can see a light at the end of the tunnel in order to reform themselves. And Amir did reform himself. Asif and Butt got longer custodial sentences, and it would have been particularly hard for Salman Butt because he just had a second child who was born. He didn't see him until he finally flew back to Pakistan when he was released. And obviously, they're also in prison in England, a foreign country, away from their family. So they certainly didn't have an easy ride. I think I think Butt would have served about 6 months of his sentence, which I think was 2 years, Asif slightly less. So I think justice was done, and justice was seen to be done. And also they had bans as well. Asif was always going to be a bit too old to come back at the peak of his abilities by the time his ban had expired, but still continues to play in Pakistan. But I think an international recall will not be happening for him.
Okay, coming to the News of the World reporter, Mahmood. Now, you make a very interesting contrast. One is his time as the ace reporter at NO2W, and whatever he touched seemed to turn into gold. He was backed with money, the massive power of the organization. And then there is an interesting contrast post this entire incident where the organization folds up and he joins the Sun, and they don't back him on a particular sting operation, which leads to his arrest. When you contrast this reporter working for News of the World and then later for the Sun, what is your personal take on the way he functioned? Did he really mess it up later, or he wasn't backed enough? And as the fake Sheikh and Mohsin Khan, which he was well known, did he really put himself out on a limb later?
I wouldn't say that the Sun didn't back him enough. I mean, just a bit of context here. I mean, as you say, Mazhar Mahmood, when he worked for the News of the World, everything he touched turned to gold. He was the most famous, certainly most famous tabloid reporter of his generation, and probably the most well-known British reporter at the time. The fake Sheikh was a well-known persona. The News of the World was comfortably the largest selling national newspaper in the United Kingdom, and he was its star man. His name across the investigation got people reading, and he did exposés of celebrities, actors, other sports people, but also exposés of criminals who were plotting to do various crimes or had done various crimes. So his name was an illustrious one within the News of the World stable. Now, he breaks the story of the spot fixing in August 2010. It's probably his finest hour. Within 11 months, the News of the World has to close because of the torrent of phone hacking allegations, which had overwhelmed the paper and the Murdoch business empire at that particular time. So the News of the World closes. Clearly, he's important to the overall company because he, as I said, is the most respected, most famous reporter on its books. So they look to keep him on side, keep him within the company. And 6 months after the News of the World closes, the Sun on Sunday is launched. The Sun hitherto had been a daily newspaper, but the News UK or News International, as it was at the time, the parent company, wanted to get back a lot of the readers whom it had lost when the News of the World closed. So the Sun on Sunday became the sort of seventh day brand of the Sun, and Mahmood is taken on as its star reporter, again covering exactly the same beat as he'd been doing before, whether it be criminal investigations or looking into the private lives of celebrities and what they were up to. Now, the difference between the News of the World and the Sun on Sunday was essentially one of budgets. The News of the World was the cash cow within the Murdoch empire, hugely successful, and money wasn't a problem for a Mahmood investigation. The Sun on Sunday didn't quite have the same resources, though it was pretty well resourced by the standards of national newspapers. But Mahmood is off following the same sort of leads, looking into the same stories. And he comes across this story involving a pop star over here by the name of Talisa. He gets a tip off that she's into drugs, she's involved in drugs. He follows it up at considerable expense, it should be said. He flies her over to Las Vegas. She then gets flown back after a luxurious stay at Las Vegas to London. They meet again at elite restaurants and hotels in London. And each time he's trying to get her to say, well, not only am I into drugs, I can actually help you with the supply of drugs. He would maintain that's exactly what she did. A subsequent court trial found that actually he had lied in terms of bits of evidence he had given against her, and there was a general feeling that this was a case of entrapment. Now, Mahmoud's critics had always argued that his basic modus operandi was entrapment, that he was creating crimes where they might not already have taken place. And the law catches up with him. He gets caught out, and he's sent to jail. It's a very clear case. Although he pleads not guilty, the jury didn't take much time to decide that he was guilty. And he, like the cricketers before him, ends up in jail. It's important to add, however, throughout all of this, that the fixing story, never a case of entrapment, because a lot of circumstantial evidence from Majid that he was already involved in the fixing world, and no element of phone hacking, which brought down the news of the world, said being involved in this case either. So this story, whatever subsequent stories might have got him in trouble, this story stands clear as a legitimate story, and as I said, probably his finest hour at the news of the world.
Nick, there is reference to the Hansi Cronje scandal. When that scandal broke in India, I was working for one of the top broadcast networks in India, and we did a lot of coverage around it. And there was a compliment which was paid to Hansi Cronje later when he admitted to the confession. They said that unlike a lot of others, he was man enough to admit. Now, let's keep that aside. I was also in touch very closely with Mohammad Azharuddin and Ajay Jadeja, worked with them on several shows later. Azhar always regretted the fact that he never got to play in 100 tests. He got run out on 99 tests, and that's exactly how it remained. Ajay Jadeja has a more sanguine approach, phlegmatic approach towards life, couches a lot in humor. But the point I'm trying to make here is that when such a scandal breaks, even in India at that point in time, there were a lot of phone calls made, threatening phone calls made. A lot of people were threatened. There was a lot of dark clouds hanging. Did you experience anything personally like that? Or are you aware that any of your colleagues who were involved in the reporting of this huge scandal got any kind of these phone calls or any kind of threats, any emails?
I'm not aware. What I would say about the Cronje affair and the other related cases which you mentioned there was a huge eye-opener for everyone, I think. I mean, there've been very murmurings about it, but it wasn't until it was laid out in the open that it became clear just this web that followed, that ensnared itself around world cricket. In Cronje's case, I mean, he did make the confession, but I would say he made the confession because the evidence was so overwhelming against him, he could hardly deny it. And I'm not sure he completely came clean about everything he'd been up to during those years when he was South Africa captain. Obviously, he's no longer with us. In terms of overall pressure and phone calls and emails, I did certainly pick up a vibe from people I talked to, let's say, on the sort of the surface / underground of this whole murky world, who did have tales of that involving Pakistan players been threatened. Obviously, for legal reasons, I can't name those, but certainly
I understand.
Those stories kept recurring, and very high profile players, both in Asia and England. That's the problem with a lot of this stuff, is that it's rumor and innuendo, and we hear these stories, and I suspect that most of them are true, but you have to tread very carefully legally. There's one story about a high profile player whose family were kidnapped and threatened if he didn't do what the fixers said. Those stories keep recurring. There's also, it's on record that I think there was a Pakistani journalist who started asking questions about Mazhar Majid shortly before the spot fixing incident at Lord's, and he received some phone calls telling him to not follow up that line of inquiry. But we don't know any more than that. But it's a criminal underworld at the end of the day, and they've got you've got huge financial interests staked in in betting and its corollary fixing. So it's no surprise that kind of thing happens.
Okay, now let me bring in our festival director, Sandeep Mishra, on this chat. And Sandeep is a celebrated sports editor, journalist, and entrepreneur, and wears a lot of hats. He was the person who launched Sports Illustrated in India, has been the sports editor of a couple of top broadcast networks, specialist in hockey. Sandeep, welcome to your show. And I want to get a sense from you. After that, feel free to ask Nick whatever you wish. But I just want to get a sense from you that you were on the ground reporting when this entire scandal broke. What was your feeling then? Did you feel that this would change the face of cricket forever?
Yeah, Rupa. In 2010, I mean, actually, when this news broke through, and most newsrooms in India, they were started scrambling, because number one, it were Pakistan players, and the way we view cricket and the kind of fan following, the amount of money involved with it. But the bigger emotion was actually Pakistan has done it, and that's where the news started getting, top priority. It suddenly became, the top three leads in any newsroom across the country for almost a week was just the scandal, and everybody was scrambling also to get more Pakistan cricketers into it, get the former cricketers to talk about it, and the similar case was with the Indian cricketers. But the larger feeling was that not get to the source of it, find out why it happens, and also figure out how to take control of the whole situation. But it was more like, oh, Pakistan has done it, so let's now run this news as large as we can, and that was the overwhelming thing for most of the journalists across the country. So it wasn't like it was a scandal that happened in London. It happened with the Pakistan team. It happened with the Pakistan team. That was the biggest thing for Indian journalists at that time.
Nick, there is an important point which is made towards the fag end of your book, and that itself could be material for another book later, which is the mercenary cricketer. And with so many new leagues happening, the Caribbean League, the Bangladesh League, the Lanka League, the Pakistan League, and the pressure to start T10 all over again, is it really possible for the ICC or for any other cricket board to put an absolute lid on something not happening again? Which is basically fixing. And when it comes to a pure mercenary cricketer, there is no question of any patriotism or sense of belonging. It's only the bucks that matter. I'm not saying they're selling their souls. They are basically selling their talent, and that's how it's going to be. But what is your take?
Yeah, it's a very good question and a very interesting point. I mean, like you, I use the word mercenary, but at the end of the day, they're only doing what we all do, which is to try and get the highest paid job we can. And if that takes you from the Caribbean to Bangladesh to Sri Lanka to England in the same year, then good luck to you. I mean, fixing, you're never going to remove it from cricket or any sport, because any sport is always open to that. As long as there's a betting market, there's essentially going to be a potential fixing market. That's not going away. That's just human nature that is open to corruption and making a fast buck if it can. How we place limits on that, how we make that harder, is not clear. And in many ways, as you just said there, cricket has almost made it more difficult for itself to police the game because of this incredible sort of surge in new leagues built around first T20 and now T10. And, the games don't mean a huge amount. They're sort of forgotten. Apart from maybe the IPL final, they're forgotten each year, and everyone moves on to their new league, and you put it behind you, and therefore, it's easy to see. And again, I don't seek to excuse it. It's easy to see how a player can rationalize it to himself. Well, I'll bat slowly between the 5th and the 10th over in this game. It's only the second game of the league. No one's going to remember it. I'll make up for it later in the season. And if I'm getting a few £1,000 for it, then why shouldn't I? In the grand scheme of things, what does it matter? I'm not excusing that, but it's easy to see how someone might rationalize that when you're just moving from one, I'm not going to use the word team, franchise, as they call it, and moving from one franchise to another around the world. There's a few other points that need to be made against that, is that a lot of these leagues which are now popping up are popping up under sort of private, under the private enterprise.
It's 6 o'clock.
Makes it makes it harder for the authorities to police. And they are popping up in countries, again, where the law enforcement capabilities to root out the cancer that is fixing are not as developed as they might be in other more established cricketing countries.
Sandeep, two quick points. One is the ICC anti-corruption unit recently held a press conference, and they said that some of the top bookies in the world are Indians, and they are willing to name them. That was point number one. And the other interesting development was a great sub-con player like Shakib Al Hasan, easily one of the best all-rounders of the game, had to sit out for almost a year because he did not report to the ICC about an overture being made to fix a match. Do you feel the screws are tightening because of these developments?
I really don't think so. I think we've had chats on this. I mean, even outside of the newsroom and inside the newsroom, and the amount of rumors that keep floating across the subcontinent. And when I say subcontinent, I mean India. I mean, you look at the way the IPL has gone around. You look at the 2015 scandal. We are talking about 2010 scandal there. What happens to CSK being banned? Rajasthan Royals being banned. And, you know, Nick is right about the money part. But when you look at the money, I don't know if Nick has this figure. The Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry said that in 1 year, in just 1 year on cricket matches, 300,000 crores are being betted across India in illegal betting. And I'm not talking of legal betting here. That 300,000 crores is approximately $40 billion plus, which is more than India's defense budget. Now, how do you bring this whole thing into perspective? You know, it's like I think I should be asking Nick here. I'll just bring two parallels: one, track and field, and cricket. I remember Gatlin being booed in the 2017 World Athletic Championships. He just won the medal out there. Nobody expected him, but he was booed off. And the same thing is now with cricket. Well, the question is that will there be a time, will there be a point where the fan can be convinced and the fan can say the match that I watched was completely clean? Will cricket ever reach a stage like this, or are we just going towards something where we are just turning a blind eye to, which is match fixing? Not even match fixing, let's say spot fixing.
Well, I would say it's a good example you cited there with Justin Gatlin, because athletics certainly has a problem with people asking, is this real? Is what I'm seeing really real? Just as cycling had a huge problem and still does have a huge problem with the legacy of Lance Armstrong. And both sports are culpable for not having taken stronger action earlier. So they've only got themselves to blame for that. I don't think we're quite there yet with cricket, I would contend. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a huge amount of cricket played internationally, or at least there was, obviously, before the current COVID crisis. There was a huge amount of cricket played internationally, and I would contend that, 99% of that was probably clean. At least I hope it was. I'm not sure there's quite as much cynicism yet about cricket as there was about those other two sports. Also, because you have to remember that cricket is a team sport. So in terms of fixing results, it's a lot harder to fix a cricket match than it is if you just want to take steroids and win the Tour de France or win the 100 meters or 200 meters in Gatlin's case, I think it was. So while I wouldn't be complacent about the challenge facing cricket, I don't think it's quite at such a dire end yet. The only thing that does worry me, and it's a thing that countries are slowly catching up on, is this idea of having legislation which criminalizes fixing. Now, Hansi Cronje was the most famous fixer, you could argue, in cricket before the Pakistanis. Now, Hansi Cronje was disgraced, but he didn't face any criminal charges. In England, they eventually managed to find a part of the statute book where they could bring criminal charges against the 3 Pakistanis. Now, once you know that not only could you get a ban for 1, 2, 3 years, but also you could end up behind bars, as the 3 Pakistani did, that's a much stronger deterrent than just a fine or, as I say, a ban. Now, Australia have put the measures in place to ensure that you can be prosecuted for fixing. I'm not sure whether that's true of other leading nations within the cricket world. Maybe you can enlighten me. And have India and Pakistan got those measures in place?
Nick, I just got to know that Sri Lanka was the first nation in Asia that criminalized this entire process of illegal betting and fixing, and they've got very tough. And that happened when Alut Gamage, the Sri Lanka minister, kept referring to the 2019 World Cup final being fixed, and I think there is a mention of that also in your book. And that is when Mahila Jayawardena and Sangakkara got very irate and they hit back, and then he completely backed off. So Sri Lanka is the only country, and there is now pressure on India to do so. Come in first, Sandeep, if you think that's possible here with so many other complications.
I really don't think so. I mean, the IPL has really given the game a huge boost, in terms of money power, financial power. The players are making a lot of money. Australia is playing there. The England players are there. Of course, Pakistan is not there except for the first IPL, which is sad because they've got a tremendous bunch of players. But if you just look at the IPL now, which is going to be held in Dubai, why is the anti-corruption unit not there? That's a big question that a lot of people are asking. And off the field, the rumors are already swirling that most of the bookies, which people say are from India, most of these bookies from London, from India, from South Africa, they're all now coming to Dubai for the IPL. So who's going to raise these questions? I didn't see these questions raised in the media. Why is the ACU not there? I mean, even inside the dressing rooms, even outside of it, you usually have these people. So why has the IPL stopped these people from coming inside? I mean, this is a very big question, and this is a very important question at such a juncture where there is a lack of trust. I mean, I don't know if you remember Chahar for CSK in 2019. He bowled 2 consecutive no balls in the 19th over. Even Dhoni came up to him and said that, "What the hell are you doing?" But it could be just two no balls. But in the environment that cricket is right now, those 2 no balls were headlines. It wasn't about poor Chahar, he just might have, he said that, the ball slipped out. But 2 consecutive no balls in an Indian Premier League, I mean, it just raises questions because those 2 balls are worth how much? 10 million, 15 million, 20 million? You can let your imagination go wherever it wants to. I think those are the questions, those are the big questions that every federation, the ICC basically needs to answer. I don't think the answers are not there right now. I don't think so.
Nick, a quick point. Someone like a Srisant got booked recently. Of course, he was later cleared by the courts, and even some of our big names, they were initially banned, not allowed to play. But there is always a backing off, and then the same person comes in and rings the bell before a cricket match. And someone like Gautam Gambhir, who's now a ruling party parliamentarian, he was ballsy enough to say that this should never be happening. Anyone who's tainted is out. But when you compare the subcontinent, the Asian subcontinent, to England, Australia, and South Africa in particular, what is your analysis, and what are the differences that you see in the approach?
Well, I think there's certainly one that the England, Australian, South Africans certainly like to think they're whiter than white, and their players would never be tainted by anything as grubby as fixing. And I think there's an element of what I call probably racial superiority, which doesn't do us justice and is not merited. I think English cricket is slightly different because we don't have the IPL and all the attention and all the huge money that goes with that. We haven't got anything like that at the moment, so there's probably not as much risk, as much interest, as much focus on it. I get the impression that the authorities here do their bit, but could probably do more. And we did have Mervyn Westfield, an English cricketer who did admit to fixing in 2012. Westfield, an associate of Danish Canaria, who said he got him into the world of fixing. And I think if you look at actually you go back to where it all started on the fixing front was Salim Malik and bookmaker John. I think it was in the mid-90s. and he was having conversations with Shane Warne and Mark Wall, which I don't think reflected well on them. And the ACB had actually done nothing for a few months. So clearly, we're not whiter and white in these parts, or in Australia, or in South Africa. But we don't have, there isn't that huge interest in cricket in the way there is in Asia, in this country.
Okay, we're running out of time. Nick and Sandeep, there's time for one last question. So I want to ask something which is generic in nature. Maybe there's not enough time to go into the depths of it all. But first, Nick, and then Sandeep, before we wrap up. When we talk about sport fixing, how big are the dangers that you see looking beyond cricket?
Sorry, could you just elaborate a bit further?
I said, when you talk about sport fixing, then beyond cricket, what are the dangers that you see? Because there have been some rumblings in tennis and other sport too. Is it really burgeoning? Is it growing out of proportion? Are you concerned?
Yeah, I think tennis is a good example there. At the moment, from what I'm aware, it's been confined to the lower levels. But again, we don't know. We can't say for sure on that front. I mean, any sport where you have a lot of matches being played, and it's an individual sport, those clearly create the circumstances in which fixing is more likely to be rife. Maybe rife or more widespread. So tennis is a good example, I think you say there. Snooker, again, we have had examples in snooker involving players that people have heard of. That is another one which has been victim to this cancer. So we shouldn't be in any doubt that cricket is not just is not the only problem here. And when sports look to grow, as all sports are looking to grow because of globalization and the pressure on money and trying to get fans in, that's when temptation comes in. That's when you go to countries where the law enforcement authorities might not share the same view as you. That's when you really leave yourself open. And that's what we're getting into at the moment. That's clearly going to be a factor now because obviously of the COVID problems, which have really put a huge strain on financial resources in sport as society as a whole.
Exactly. Sandeep, closing comments.
I think I will be more worried about the domestic scene in India. I'll just give you one short example. Some years back, I was just checking out Betfair in terms of figuring out which Indian domestic sport is on it. And Mohan Bagan, one of the clubs from Kolkata, which is part of the Football League, they were playing a final in Goa. That itself had $1 million betting on it. And that really got me worried that, why is Betfair into domestic Football League? And that also Mohan Bagan, they didn't do the rest of the matches. They were only doing the final. I think at this point of time, what India requires, and I do believe that the media puts a lot of pressure. I do believe that the media can bring those answers out. We need a David Walsh here. I think Nick would know David Walsh very well. I think he's the one who took Lance to almost a huge amount of pressure in press conferences. So the Indian media landscape now needs a David Walsh.
I'll pass that on to David.
Such a fascinating conversation. Arup, thank you for moderating today. Arup Ghosh, of course, is one of India's best-known TV anchors. Nick Greenslade, who just wrote this fabulous book. Thank you to you, Nick, for sharing some of the backstories of what went into writing this book. And thank you to Sandeep Mishra as well, one of the top Indian sports journalists. We're going to be coming up with our last session of the day soon. COVID-19 has changed many of our worlds these past 6 or 7 months. And our last session will examine mental health, sport, and resilience with 2 Canadian athletes and authors who know this topic very well. Kevin Rempel and Kristen Worley will share some of the lessons they've learned and the books that they wrote about. That's coming up in a few minutes here at the Canadian International Camera Sports Literature Festival. Stay tuned.